You are listening to Exploring Sacred with your host, Denise Iwana Francisco, on the Temple Within Radio and Digital Media Network, giving voice to the sacred.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Exploring Sacred. Welcome to a beautiful Wednesday. Here in Michigan, like many places across the northern U.S. right now, it is cold. It is well below zero here at our home, and it doesn't look like it's going to get a whole lot warmer than zero. So we're tucked inside today, looking out at the beautiful enchanted forest. And yes, we've got piles of corn and bird food and all those good things, and fresh water for the animals out there that find respite here at our home. They are well equipped with warm water bird baths and troughs of water that have heating elements, and Todd makes sure that fresh bird food and fresh corn is always available. So we're all nestled here in the enchanted forest, and we welcome you to sit a spell and be here with us. Good morning, Rob. Yeah, fall has fell and spring has sprung. Yeah, good morning, Robin. It's good to see you all this morning here in the house. And for those of you that would like to join us here in the chat room, please do. It's easy to do once you get into Spreaker.com. Follow the links there from Facebook or Google or wherever you're finding me from. Perhaps it's from my website. And you're welcome into the chat room. Winter is definitely here. This morning we're going to talk about ancestral memories and the way that we carry those memories. Sometimes we're very conscious of those memories, and other times we can be very unconscious of those memories until something stirs a recognition or stirs something within our soul that says this feeling is familiar, this smell is familiar, this sight is familiar, or this person feels familiar. And that's the focus of the show today. So I'm just going to oh my goodness, Kelly Spencer is over there in Apple Valley, Minnesota, and she's saying good morning from the frozen tundra of Minnesota. A chilly -48 as the bright sun shines. Okay, you have the temperatures beat. Oh my goodness, here in Michigan, we're not quite there, Kelly, but I remember those days with you and I going to school and waiting for the bus, or you coming to pick me up in your dad's car, and oh my gosh, there's nothing like a Minnesota winter morning, is there? That's a good memory, right? Cellular memories. I sometimes think, which of my cellular memories, those memories that are so embedded in my psyche of experiences and thoughts, high highs and low lows and passions and the mundane in between, how many of those ancestral memories will be passed on to my grandchildren and to their children and perhaps nieces and nephews, right? If I don't know that I have any of those, but if I had them, how many of them in the future would go forward to carry perhaps some of my thoughts, some of my memories, some of the components of any of my lifetimes? Good morning, Katie Battle. No mail delivery today, but the offices are open. Oh my goodness, I've never heard a U.S. postmaster ever say that. No mail delivery today. That's pretty astounding. That's cold. That means it's cold up here in the northern part of North America. I know some of the newspapers, South Bend is not publishing today. And in all of my years at the Grand Rapids Press, we never, ever, from my understanding, in the 48 or 49 years of the Herald Publishing, have not ever published a newspaper. But even some of the newspapers up here are not publishing. It's cold. It makes us have to sit for a spell. A lot of us want to get warm and snuggly and cozy. And when we do that, we tend to think about things. We tend to ruminate. And sometimes our wily brain can take us on these goose chases of thought, right? These thought patterns that randomly show up, that disturb our peace of mind oftentimes. But if we can consciously be consciously aware, let me say it that way, if we can be consciously aware of our thoughts and take a moment to think about some things, maybe to speak to our ancestors, to call them in, to want to learn from them. Every morning, all of you know that I have a couple of prayers that I say daily, or mantras that I say daily. And not only do they help me get into a balanced frame of being, but lately, more than ever, I think probably mostly thanks to Amantha Murphy. Blood of my blood, bone of my bone, ancestors come. Welcome to my home, good and loving ancestors. Remembering them not only on All Souls Day or All Saints Day or the day that they died, but every day. Welcome, good and loving ancestors, blood of my blood, bone of my bone. Thank you for being present and sharing your wisdom with me, sharing your stories, sharing who I am with me. And what that does, at least in my mind, is it may or it may not call all of my ancestors, those dearly departed ones who have since left this human existence and gone home to heaven or Valhalla or Summerland, but have gone home to I believe, the heart and mind of Creator. They may or they may not accept the invitation and come into my home. But for me, what it does more than anything is it speaks to my own being. It speaks to the ancestors that flow through my blood and are part of my bones. It awakens the blood of my blood and the bones of my bones that dwell within my body. And it awakens the ancestors that dwell within my cellular structure and my memories and who I am, in the way that I look, in the way that I speak, in the way that I feel. And I sit with that for a moment. Which of my ancestral patterning is going to speak to me today? Which is it that I need to pay attention to today? That's part of my inclusion in every day now, is paying attention to what my own body is saying on behalf of all of the ancestors who make up who I am. Last night, my son Dane received his Ancestry.com results. And we were having this great long discussion about likes and dislikes and why we're drawn to certain things, and we feel familiar. We feel very familiar with certain things, certain places, certain people, certain smells. And the other day I took a moment to take off of Ancestry.com those of Dane's relatives, his grandfathers, my grandfathers, who were Confederate soldiers. There were several of them in my father's line. Some who fought on behalf of the great state of Alabama, some who fought on behalf of the great state of Georgia, some Revolutionary War veteran grandfathers who fought on behalf of the Continental Army of Maryland, Continental Army of Virginia, one grandfather who fought in the French and Indian Wars. My son has always had this interest in the military since the day he was born. He used to collect military artifacts, even as a young boy. And last night we were talking about this idea that perhaps, because so many of his grandfathers, and most recently my adoptive father and my biological father, both being lifetime military men, both being Vietnam veterans, maybe that's why he has a propensity toward this fascination with war and the history of war. And why, even though that he has always lived his life in Michigan as a Yankee, he has had a deep interest in the Confederacy. And even as a young boy, he studied it deeply. By the time he was 10 years old and we took him to Gettysburg, he already knew exactly where he wanted to go on the battlefield. Not that the Georgia or the Alabama infantry served there, but he already knew exactly where he wanted to go. And there were parts of it little round top that we had to literally extricate him from because he just wept as a 10-year-old boy there on the battlefield. He said, Mom, it's all starting to make sense, isn't it really? I said, well, it is, honey. And he said, but how can that be? How can that be? Well, I said, if you take a look at your ancestry and you see that, well, you're mostly your mother, which is interesting, in your DNA and your biology. Perhaps it's your grandfathers on your mother's side that speak through you the most because you're made up of them the most. Your DNA says that they contributed most to who you are as a man today. And perhaps, just perhaps, those memories that they have are also implemented within who you are right now to this day. He said, yeah, that feels right to me. That feels right to me. But why do we choose that? Well, I believe, and we didn't talk about this last night, but I believe sometimes we choose our ancestry, our DNA relatives, sometimes to help begin new patterns, sometimes to break old patterns, sometimes to pick up where somebody else left off to carry on the tradition. Sometimes to wrap up unfinished business. It is amazing as well, not only the places that feel familiar to us, but also those people, places, and things that sometimes do not resonate with us. We have something of an ill feeling towards somebody or something or a particular culture, and we can't explain why. We can't explain why. Well, sometimes I think we have an aversion because of ancestral memories, the memories of our ancestors that are flowing through us at all times. And when somebody says, like Kelly, you come from a long line of strong Norse women. You're a Norse woman, for heaven's sakes, right? Even in the recognition of that, there's a feeling that says, I am. And not only are they standing with me, they are within me. They are within me. Rob is saying, I hated history unless bullets were flying or swords were crossing until I had a music history prof that taught it was a battle of ideas. Yeah. Yes. Yes. It's amazing as we grow older and we come into our saging, right, into our croning, how it is that all of a sudden with age comes the ability to look back. The other day, my cousin Danielle, if you happen to be listening, I want to thank you. Danielle's father and my biological father were brothers. And Danielle mentioned that the other night her father came to her in a dream. And my father was present as well. And I thought to myself in reading her note and the gift that was attached to it was a beautiful portrait of my biological father in his military uniform. He was a member of the horse cavalry, the Iron Horse Cavalry down there in Georgia. And I looked at that photo and I thought about the way our ancestors can sometimes pique our remembrances or help us to pay attention by coming to us in our dreams. Wake up, pay attention. Now, the first time that I met my biological father was thanks to a dream that my adoptive father initiated one summer evening years ago, 7 years ago. And lo and behold, right, that photo that I received yesterday is the man that was in my dream that my father introduced me to. Even though my father was still alive at that time, his higher consciousness, his higher self, knew that the days were coming when I would be meeting my biological family, and my father, the Sarge, being the man that he was, from the highest level of who he is and who he was at that point, came to me in my dream time from that space of consciousness to begin the ball rolling. And what of the ancestral memories of places that we go to or traumas that we sometimes feel? You know, recently this spring, me and Todd, Kevin and Kelly and Lily, and we all went to Salem, Massachusetts. And, you know, many people will not go there because they have remembrances or thoughts or feelings that make them feel as though they were there during the times of the trials of the witches there. And I've never felt that way, although Salem feels familiar to me. That particular trauma does not feel familiar to me, and yet for many it does. And they'll ask the question, where does that come from? Many people will attribute it to, well, it must be a past life. I must have had that experience myself. And so when I go to Salem, Massachusetts, or I go to Gettysburg, or I go to Wounded Knee, it must be a past life that I experienced there. And possibly, absolutely, it could very well be. In my thoughts, anyway. But it could also be that what you are feeling is the memory or the trauma of an ancestor who did experience that. Who did experience that. And what do you do with that? Well, you can run from it because it's very uncomfortable. Or you can sit with it for a moment. Is this my experience? Is this an ancestor's experience? Whose experience is this? And have I come here to help heal that? Have I come to bear witness to it in another time? I believe we're all time walkers as well. Those moments of deja vu. Right? Sometimes, the foods that we love, where does that come from? Where does that come from? Certain foods that we smell for the very first time, and yet it feels as though we have known that smell forever. One of those smells for me is the smell of freshly cooked grits. I love grits. I had grits last weekend for breakfast. Todd and I went to a restaurant. Oh, they had grits on the menu. So I said, could I have some grits with a side of butter, please? And some grits with some butter and some pepper on top or some maple syrup. Where does that come from? The spontaneous memories that we have when we go somewhere. I remember being in the Highlands of Scotland for the very first time. And a group of us, Laura Smith, myself, Nikki Jorgensen, who else was there? Lily was there, Stephen Schmidt, group of us. And we were sitting in a parlor in this ancient old home / castle / B&B. And we were sitting in this parlor just visiting. And I said, wouldn't it be magnificent? Wouldn't it be wonderful if a bagpipe came in here attached to a player? And not 5 minutes later, an older gentleman walked through. He looked like an old New England salt, right, wearing a magnificent kilt and his bagpipes, and he began to play. And I was sitting in this like Queen Anne looking antique chair, and I remember the tears starting to flow. And they were coming from a place of remembrance that wasn't anything that I had currently remembered in this lifetime, because it was the first time I had ever been to Scotland. And it affected me in such a way that I had to just be with it. And it was one of those, you ever have those cries where it's not an ugly cry or anything like that, but your eyes refuse to stop leaking? It was one of those moments as this bagpiper played, and we all sat mesmerized at the beauty of the moment that we were all sitting in. Only to learn, a few weeks ago that my father's people come from the Highlands of Scotland. Clan MacDonald and Clan MacGregor. And once they moved to England, they changed their last name to King. And in the late 1500s, the King clan moved to the United States and settled in Maryland and continued their spread south. And I looked at that and I thought to myself, well, no wonder I was moved by the sound of those bagpipes and sitting in the Highlands of Scotland, because it was an ancestral memory of my grandfathers and my grandmothers, the members of the Clan MacDonald and the Clan MacGregor and the Clan King. And it began to make sense to me. And I thought to myself, isn't it a magnificent thing that here in the States, if we choose to look at it this way, we really are a culmination of pretty magnificent peoples from everywhere, and their stories are not lost. They remain within us if we take a moment to listen. Nikki's saying, true story. My mother's side were Livingstons. Ah. Kelly is saying, yes, that question I ask, is this your way of telling me your story or teaching me a lesson? And I always say thank you. Thank you for communicating so beautifully with me. Thank you for reminding me of who I am. Yes. You know, Dane was so funny last night. He said, oh my God, Mother, I'm part Swedish. He said, well, some of these numbers and figures kind of surprised me. I said, but how do you feel about that, Dane? How do you feel about being a brawny Scotsman from a long line of Scotsmen? And how do you feel about being a grandson of the Netherlands and of Scandinavia? I said, you're a Viking. He said, yeah, I guess I am. My cousin Scott's more like Ragnar and I look like Rollo. I said, exactly. Because you see, we have these preconceived notions sometimes about how a specific group of people is supposed to look. Aren't all Scandinavians, aren't all Scottish people blonde or red-haired? Or no. And how did they get that way? Well, you know, there was a lot of commerce and trade going on way, way back in time that sometimes we forget actually took place before FedEx and UPS and all of those kind of things. There were great markets and tradeways from the ancestral lands, from the lands of our mothers and our fathers. Sometimes we can't explain it, but if we sit with it for a bit, you know, it's interesting coming also from African descendancy, from the Congo of Africa. In fact, if the good folks at 23andMe are correct, most all of my people were African until just a few hundred years ago. The majority in my DNA anyway. And I think to myself, even the remnants of them within my blood may, through one of my grandchildren, become more than just bits and pieces, morsels of. Sometimes I believe that we choose ancestral memories in any given lifetime, and it can skip generations, which is why I'm talking about this. It can skip generations that perhaps one of my grandchildren will decide that there's some ancestral healing to be done with the African lineage of my people. And so maybe I will have a grandchild that will decide that they would like to dawn more upon their bones and their flesh and in their memories and in who they are more of the African ancestry, to come here to work with that, to be with that, to reflect with that, to heal with that, or to continue on. It's marvelous how all of that stardust, that earth dust, from wherever our people come from. Sometimes I think to myself, is it a cellular memory I'm having? And is it a cellular memory I'm having of someone that I was, who was actually an ancestor of mine? Dipping and diving, those darn Vikings anyway. Exactly. We were watching Vikings last week, and Dane said, "Oh my goodness, look how dark those Danish Vikings are." He said, "Where did they come from that they would be that dark?" I said, "Kind of like the dark Irish there in Northern Ireland, Dane. You know, when we were at Stirling Castle there in Scotland, the docents at the castle looked very much like Dane, and I stopped one of them, and he explained that yes, he was definitely Scottish, but that his forebears came from Spain. Thank you, Vikings. Thank you, slave trade. It's amazing how our stardust, our earth dust, gets transported from place to place. I feel as though we're always developing through our ancestral memories, and sometimes the memories will speak more loudly. Some of them can be very quiet, and we begin our own new memories, which is where I began the show. So what is it going to be like for my grandchildren and my great-grandchildren the first time they go out to the Badlands of South Dakota? The first time they're in the Black Hills, will they sit? And will they think to themselves, I don't know why I'm going to say this, but I've been here before. These Black Hills, these Badlands, they feel familiar to me. These smells, these sounds. Why do they resonate with me? Which leads me then to think about, so what ancestral memories am I building for future children, for perhaps my future self, that I can look back? First time I did go to the Badlands, I knew I had been there before. Or somebody had been there before who was speaking through me. Katie is saying, is cellular memory like deja vu? Yes, ma'am. Absolutely it is like that concept of, oh my goodness, I've been here before. Ever do that? You go somewhere, or you smell something, or you meet somebody, or something happens, and you say, I've been here before. I know this place. I know this place. I know those words. Where have I heard that poem before? Where have I heard that song before? Where have I heard that piece of music before? Sometimes we step into deja vu, into an energy of something that has not yet happened on the physical plane. It's kind of precognitive. And other times we can step into a cellular memory or a cellular thought. Sometimes we can carry around a cellular memory that perhaps feels like melancholy, a continual melancholy. I have a dear friend, Kathy, whose grandmother and grandfather came from the Isle of Skye in Scotland. In fact, their family home is still there on the Isle of Skye. And she said, for years she felt a melancholy. Her sister also felt a melancholy. They couldn't explain it because they both had a really great life here. And so where is this perpetual melancholy? Well, Kathy took a trip to the Isle of Skye, to her ancestral home, and learned the story about her grandmother and her grandmother's grandmothers, and the time that the island was overcome by Rome. That time when cloisters were built, and those that were once out upon the land, working with the land, being with the land, serving the land, were made to look at the land from inside cloistered buildings. And so began the melancholy of being with the land, all of a sudden being worshiping the land, working the land, not being on the land, the magic of the land, the healing of the land. Because worshiping could only be done in a building. And in that recognition for Kathy, she came home and she wrote about it, that experience of learning and that experience of understanding where the melancholy came from. Generations of women who were upon the land, working with the land, being with the land, smelling the sea. Call them healers, call them, the wise ones, the croned women, now made to live within convents. Nikki, you remember being in the Abbey, there on the Isle of Iona. Many of the men and women that were in that group found that they just wanted to weep at a remembrance of when the day came that they had to be cloistered in order to be with the Creator. But in that recognition for Kathy and sharing that with her sister, she said it was as though the visit back to the land and being able once again to be upon the land and with the land and healing with the land helped to heal the ancestor whose melancholy was embedded within the fiber of both she and her sister. There was a moment of healing. She didn't run from it. She didn't shriek from it when she was on the island or visiting her grandmother's home, but she was with it. She bore witness to it. And in bearing witness to it, was able to lift it, to reconcile it, to understand it. Rob, that's a great question. Why some of us look at the tarot like it's a strange alphabet, but look at the I Ching and immediately resonate with it. Yes, the I Ching, absolutely. Even forms of divination can feel very familiar, very familiar. I remember years ago when Sonia Choquette said to me, and one of these days, Denise, you're going to create a deck of cards. I said, oh no, I'm not doing that. My catechism teachers told me that that was not a good thing to do. You don't mess around with that stuff. And lo and behold, right? It's about coming to understand. It's about being intelligent. I think one of the beautiful things about the day and age that we're living in is the ability through the internet and wonderful groups that you can actually join that are viable, healthy groups to learn about the bone of my bone and the blood of my blood. To come to understand, as Kelly said, who we are. And in doing so, coming to learn to understand more of who our neighbor is. And what that neighbor has been through. I believe that every nation on this planet has gone through trauma, has been enslaved in some way. And we all have those ancestral memories somewhere of hardships, hard times, perhaps slavery. And we also have memories of magnificent times, the music, the food, the sounds, the smells. It's an interesting thing, this human lifetime and this series of lifetimes I believe that we live. And the older I get, the more, at least for myself, I'm coming to think, at least to me, in my way of thinking, that in the beginning of my human experiences, I chose a pretty amazing group of people, a group of souls that I would incarnate with and reincarnate with, and we would change positions perhaps and become our own ancestors and share experiences in order to inform the entirety of the clan, so to speak. Kind of like when we talk about Creator or God being an expression, having all of these magnificent experiences. I think that we all have these amazing experiences through the blood of our blood and the bone of our bone to inform one another. Like Dominic is informing Gabriel right now that he's coming through because he's taunting Gabriel. Be interesting, those of you that are familiar with transmortification. I wonder how those two were related in another lifetime, or will be in a future lifetime. With that, everyone, the purpose of the show today was about taking time in the winter, these cold months, to speak with your ancestors, whether you know them or not. They know you because they live within you. They live within your children. They live within your parents, whether you know them or not. My blood relatives have been speaking to me since I was a little girl, and the accuracy of their speaking to me has been, for me, mind-boggling as they have been revealed. Mind-boggling. And they have much to teach. Just because they lived before us doesn't mean that they don't have something to teach us about the here and the now and who we are becoming. Who we are becoming. Kelly's saying, such a wonderful subject. I think this should be a series, just saying. It's wonderful to have pride in your clan, or to have pride in your tribe, to have pride in your people. But in that, I think this day and age also gives us pause to think about other tribes, other clans, and learning about who they are, how different they are, and yet how much alike we are. Whether they're human clans or animal clans, tree clans, flower clans, species, sometimes we call them. Learning to honor those clans. Educating ourselves. Because those are the cellular memories then that we're going to gift to our future generations, that we took the time not to be ignorant, but we took the time to investigate, to become familiar with, to learn, to love, to have compassion for. Those are the cellular memories I'm hoping to pass down. So that when my grandchildren and my great-grandchildren and my great-great-grandchildren travel to places that I've never been, they feel familiar, or they feel a warmth for all living beings. All living beings. Not only the clans of their origin, the tribes of their origin, but for the origin of this human tribe, this animal tribe, this flora and fauna tribe, this star tribe. With that, everybody, thank you for being part of my tribe. Get out there, shine your light, because you know what I always say every week, it's what you came here to do, because it is to get out there and shine it as only you can shine it. Blessings be, everybody. Have a beautiful day.